Where do you see Bitcoin 5 years from now?
I'll start with price. Bitcoin is going to demonetize gold, all these things, the real estate, all these things. Like, I'm not worried. This is all going to happen. It's also going to create a new marketplace that does not exist today. And
what do you mean by that? Would it be safe to say that energy now becomes a monetary asset?
It has always been, right? Money is a memory of work. I think the Bitcoin mining industry is going to blur the lines finally and going to make this connection between energy and money.
Yeah, welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin Live. We're here, the beautiful Lugano behind us, the clouds cleared up. And the reason for that is because Rapha's here. For anyone who doesn't know, this is Rapha Zagury. He's the CEO of Elektron Mining. You're going to hear a lot more about them. They've been building in stealth for the last couple of years. I'm honored to be joined by the brains behind it all.
Thank you for having me here. This is gorgeous. The setup is amazing, man.
Thanks for joining me, man. And it's Alpha Zeta's back in town, which is great to hear.
It's good.
So Rapha, tell me a little bit more about this, because of course me and you know each other personally, but the audience perhaps doesn't know you. You've been building this massive mining operation in stealth mode over these last couple of years. You've been focusing on efficiency. You've been focusing on deployment. How were you able to do so?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's not me, right? We have a large team, a team that helps us with that. But we were back, I think, to what we do well, which is having our eyes down, heads down, focusing on building, getting a lot of machines online. And it's been, a wild journey for this last, I would say, particularly last 12 months. It's been really, really crazy. Traveling around nonstop, coding a lot of new things. I love coding. So that was part of, I think the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that you can do a little bit of everything, right? So the last 12 months were a lot about building, focusing on new sites, infrastructure, deploying machines, and then rebuilding and getting more efficiency out of the machines. It's super exciting, man. It's crazy to see. I still look at the numbers sometimes and I can't believe that we're here.
Rapha, you're originally from Brazil, right?
Yeah.
And you were talking, I think we've had conversations about this. How has growing up in Brazil affected your outlook on money?
Yeah, I think it has everything to do, first of all, with my whole background. I think how I grew up as a person, right? And more importantly, about money. So I'll tell you a couple of stories that I think shape well, and it's hard for people to understand the things that we went through in Brazil, like in the late 80s and early 90s, and then really conceptualize that, when they lived in different worlds in places like this, right? So in the late 80s, early 90s in Brazil had hyperinflation. And when I mean hyperinflation, like prices changing not only by the day, but by the hour, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember my mom would take me to the supermarket with her. First of all, everybody got paid on the 31st of the month. The first day of the month, all supermarkets were packed, because what people would do is get that money, that this is the time that you actually receive your paycheck in money from your boss, right? And people would get the money, and then they would run straight to the big shopping grocery stores to change the money to groceries, because groceries were their store value, right? At least they knew that within the month they wouldn't lose money, because literally if you got the money in the first of the month and you waited to the 31st, you would get less than half of the stuff that you had in the beginning of the month, right? So you can imagine how that changes the psyche of everybody.
Of course, yeah.
I remember stories like my mom giving me money, lunch money, to the school and saying, here's the money, don't bring any change back. Whatever you have in change, you ask and spend it and get, a gum or whatever, don't bring the money back.
Wow.
So that, of course, shaped me. It also shaped the whole nation. If you look in Brazil, I don't know if you watched the Senna documentary, Ayrton Senna, the Formula 1 driver. So
the one that passed away, unfortunately.
The one that had the accident and passed away in 91. But in that documentary, they tell the story of why Senna was so popular. And one of the reasons why he was so popular was because the country was in such disbelief, right? The lack of a store value, the lack of money, the lack of, being able to store your energy into something really has deep, impact on a population. It was a population without hope. There was no hope. And that, having Senna being one of the top drivers that won everything, that, was in the world stage, for Brazilians was something that, of course, that was one of the few prizes that they actually had, right? Yeah. And Sundays, when you usually had the Formula 1's races, crazy, and you see this in the documentary. You see people in the favelas, right? Think about a shock, right? In the favelas, in these very, very poor places, there's one television in a bar, and there's like a huge crowd around the television just to watch the Formula One race, right?
Yeah.
The most elitist sport that you can imagine the world being watched in the favelas, right? Because that was, for a lot of people, that was a representation of hope, right? And not having, I think, strong money, not being able to kind of store the fruits of your labor, right, in something, I think it has a lot to do with that.
Of
right?
course. Of course.
So yeah, that has definitely had a huge impact in my life. I think the interest that I ended up having in economics, I always liked to code since I was small. I started coding when I was 7. When I was 13, I was selling software out. So loved to code. A lot of people thought, oh, natural things to go do, computer science or something like that. And even though I did start computer engineering, I left to graduate as an economist, right? And a lot of it was because of the things that I saw in the 90s and the issues that I saw, and that troubled me. Like, this needs to be fixed in some sort of way. And not that I could fix, but at least I could try to understand better why some of those things actually happen. And it wasn't until I found Bitcoin that I could really comprehend, like, oh, there's actually a solution for all of this. There is a place that you can store, your money in an asset that is not going to be devalued without purpose.
So Bitcoin, essentially, you saw the symptoms, right? And it attracted you to a certain type of education. You had a natural knack for coding. And then when Bitcoin came around, it snapped and you realize, oh my God, this could be a potential solution. And was that the beginning of your rabbit hole journey?
I wish I could say it was that fast. It wasn't. I think like everyone in Bitcoin, it takes time. The first time I heard about Bitcoin was around 2015. By that time, there was already a lot of talk about, the issues with the Federal Reserve and, debt exploding out of control. And here we are, exploding much more than then. But there were talks about this at that time. And there was this guy, John Malden, that he wrote a newsletter called Thoughts from the Frontline. Old gold bug, talked a lot about gold, right? And then in 2015, I remember reading one of his newsletter. And in that newsletter, he said, well, here's digital gold, Bitcoin, right? And I had kind of like heard about Bitcoin here and there, but for me, it was like almost like internet gaming money, right? The same like, what do they call it? Roblox bugs, right? Things like that. I really didn't comprehend what it was, but that was the first time that I took it a little bit more seriously. And I started reading about it, right?
Of course.
It wasn't until say a few years later that, I got more comfortable and I started showing this. I was also a trader, right? I was in Wall Street.
Let's talk about that, right? Because you worked you're very humble, but you have a very impressive background in the traditional financial world. So could you talk to me a little bit about that? What your experience was, how many years you spent there? Because I always tell this for anyone who works in traditional finance. I'm like, dude, you worked in the belly of the beast. You saw things that the rest of us didn't see.
It is true.
You have a very impressive resume, Rapha.
Thank you. I'll go quickly, give a little bit of a background of what I did. I did a lot of things in Wall Street. So born and raised in Brazil, then in 2000, started working after graduating, started working in Brazil for a hedge fund. And I always wanted to have some international experience, right? I have an uncle who is an economist that always told me, like, if you really want to do something, you can't stay in Brazil. Like, you're going to be hitting the ceiling here very quickly. You have to get international exposure. So the way that I thought to get that was to apply for an MBA in the US. I was super young. I honestly thought I wasn't going to get into any programs, but I applied anyway. Like, I was 23 at the time. I applied and I got accepted in a couple of schools and decided to go to Yale. So I went to Yale for 2 years and came with my wife, Juliana, that you met. And Juliana, she always told us, like, we're going to spend 2 years, right? And then we're going to go back to Brazil. And fast forward 16 years later, we were still in the US, but that was the plan. When I graduated, I was planning to go back to Brazil to work for the Safra family. The Safra family, they are one of the wealthiest banking families in Brazil, and to do fixed income trading at the time. And the plan was to come to Brazil. And in one of these things, you look back in, things that happen in your life, and they're usually like small things that like change everything.
Of course.
So this is one of them. My wife had moved to Brazil already. I was about to move to Brazil, and I got a phone call who was going to be my boss at Starlink. He's like, well, we thought better, instead of taking you to Brazil, we're opening a bank in New York. You're already there. I had, I forgot what it's called, but like a visa that allowed me to work for a while. And I went to work for the bank there on the fixed income trading desk. So I started their fixed income trading desk there. With that, I started to, know a lot of people in Wall Street. We started to do a lot of trades with other banks in Wall Street. I met some traders at Goldman. We started doing some transactions together. A few of them went really well. And like, well, we want to do stuff like what you guys are doing. Why don't you come to Goldman? I went to Goldman, worked there. And another one of these things that, changes everything. Right after I started at Goldman, I was supposed to start doing mostly like Latin America coverage, but the people that were covering the US, there was a gap, and they're like, well, why don't you cover US clients? So I started covering some of the largest, individuals, family offices, some institutions as well at Goldman. And we did a little bit of everything, but mostly on structured products for different asset classes, right? Did that for a couple of years. This was, just to put it on time, as the financial crisis was about to hit. So 2007, right? There were a lot of, the one thing about the financial crisis is that it didn't happen overnight, even though we think about it. Like back in 2006, people were talking about things are going to blow up, house prices are exploding, right? So I decided to move from Goldman. I got an offer to go to Merrill to build a trading desk that will be cross-asset class and would cover their largest clients, right? Start from scratch. I always like starting things from scratch. So I joined Merrill. I did that for a little bit, six years. But the point is, at Merrill, I saw the financial system really change. I'll tell you one story. So I got to Merrill, and I want to say for like 6 months after I got there, the financial crisis blew up, right? And they're here and thinking like, I'm out of a job. I don't know what's going to happen. Merrill was sold to Bank of America in this process, right? I saw all of that. And then I also saw a lot of regulation coming to the bank. So banks before, it's very clear for me, the banking industry before the financial crisis is one, and after the financial crisis is completely different one. We had to change systems to adapt to like Dodd-Frank changes, right? All of those different risks that we used to take, we couldn't take anymore. So it completely changed the dynamics inside banks, and a lot of the cool, innovative things that we could do, couldn't do anymore, right? And that created, I think, a vacuum or migration of people that left banks to go to hedge funds where they could do other things. But the appeal for banking for me started to gradually go away. The other thing is that, unfortunately, as you stay longer and longer in banks, or fortunately, I don't know, you go high into more executive positions that you're doing less of building and much more politics, relationships. And that for me, like I didn't want to do any of that. So I left Merrill, went back to Brazil in 2016. And then in Brazil, I started a few companies, but that's a different story. That's a little bit of my Wall Street background.
Well, no, I mean, it's extremely impressive, man. And I think you're very humble about it, right? So, you come from Brazil, right? Come from Latin America myself, but, you come from Brazil, you get into Yale, right? And then you work at one of the most prestigious, banks in the world, Goldman Sachs. And then you go to Merrill Lynch, right? So you build this very impressive...
Can I make a note here?
Of course.
I think, in this time, this is something I think about all the time. In this time and place that, a lot of people are questioning like migration and how the US sits in the whole world, I can tell the US embraced me and my family like no other country would ever embrace, right? What you just said, think about it. It's like, I could never think about, an American that goes to Brazil and then, does all these things. Like naturally, I think countries are more closed. The US, I think it's the most open country in the world for immigration. And it's just beautiful. It's amazing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's crazy that we live in this country. Well, we're not in this country right now, but we're in Lugano, but we're talking about the country that embraces you based on your skills and your merits, right? And I think that's, absolutely beautiful. And then it creates opportunities and people like yourself, right? And there's many other stories of first generation entrepreneurs that ended up building these enormous countries that otherwise would not have those opportunities in other countries.
And the US is my country by choice, right? I feel today that I am as much, if not more American than I am Brazilian, right? Both my kids were born there. We spent a lot of time there. We have a ton of friends in the US. That's where my company is, right? So
let's talk about mining, Rapha, right? So I think one of the misconceptions I think that we see in the Bitcoin space is that somehow using less energy is a good thing, right? Somehow, energy is bad. Energy is a demon. It's kind of like it's portrayed as like this type of moral failure if you use less energy. And I think that's a complete misconception. I think it's kind of changing. I don't know. It's changing the narratives, and I think Bitcoin mining in itself is actually helping change that narrative back to where it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tell you a story I think that fits really well here, and I think will set the tone to why this is so important. So when I was at Yale, you have to do a summer job, right, between the 2 years. So I decided, all my friends were going to Wall Street to crazy things, and what I decided to do is I'm going to do something different. And this opportunity appeared to work for an environmental fund. So these guys, what they were doing was doing business plans for like very small business in the Amazon to help them, raise small amount of capitals, but that would make a lot of difference, right? So I flew to the Amazon. I spent 3 months in the heart of the Amazon. And one of the places we went, I remember clearly, it was called Laranjal do Jari, middle of nowhere. Imagine you fly somewhere, you take a small plane, you go somewhere, you get a boat, 6-hour boat ride is what you get, right? You drive for like hours and like there are no streets, there's nothing, but you get to this place and there is prosperity everywhere in the sense that you have trees with the best fruits that you can imagine, a lot of fish in the river, right? So the richness of nature is everywhere. But at the same time, the people were extremely poor. There's no electricity, right? There's no energy for this city. And you would see that, night would fall and the city pretty much dies, collapses. There's nothing happening, right? You see kids coming back from school to study, and they're studying in these open areas, right, outside. So energy is progress at the end of the day. I think people get it switch on their minds. They think that, too much energy, would lead to bad, but no, energy is progress. And I can guarantee that if you had electricity in this place, it would improve the quality of life for everybody there. I think nobody can question that, right? So of course I'm talking about an extreme, but sometimes it's good to go to the extremes to try to prove a point, right? Why I told you that is that there's a study, I've heard there's a chart that will show a correlation between GDP and energy consumption, right? It's almost a perfect line, right? The higher the GDP, the higher energy consumption you're going to have. Energy consumption is also, a reflection of the advance of civilization, right? You have the Kardashev, different stages. Scale. Scale, right? So we are at 0.7 of the scale, not at 1 yet, right? So we're estimated to be at 0.7 of the scale. So more energy, equals to better progress, I think, through advancement of civilization, right? And people still, I think there's this rhetoric out there that, we're consuming too much energy, consuming energy is bad to the environment, right? And in a sense, there is some truth to that, right? Because of course, if you're consuming bad energy that is going to pollute everything, then of course it's not good. But shutting it down is also not the solution. We're going to go back to the dark ages, right? If we do that. And unfortunately, that's what some people suggest, right? And that ties, I think, 100% into mining. We can go to the details of how we see it and how I'm having these conversations, but absolutely, it ties 100% with Bitcoin mining.
No, absolutely. Because I think, Bitcoin in itself, right, it makes grids efficient, right? It makes renewable energy sources that otherwise would not be viable without government subsidies actually viable, right? So yeah, if you want to do a little bit of a deep dive into how transformational Bitcoin mining is to the energy grid in general.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm having a ton of these conversations now. There are some, I can use Brazil as an example because Brazil overbuilt the energy grid on solar and wind. We have a very good solar and wind generation, not on the grid, right? But some of these are in remote areas that can't send the energy anywhere. So I was having a conversation with one of the largest energy companies in Brazil, and they're telling me, well, what we're doing now is that we have this huge wind farm here in the northeast of Brazil. It's a very windy place, and we're bringing in all these batteries from China so that we can stock the energy and then just put it back to the grid at night, right? And I said, okay, so where are these coming from, how much they cost, and the capex for that is ridiculous, right? And the technology is not even that good, right? And I tell you, this is not a Bitcoiner, guy that never heard about Bitcoins. It was the first meeting we're having, right? So I talking about that, well, what if you could, have a monetary battery, a monetary fuel cell that you could store the capital and much cheaper than you buy. And by the way, much less pollutant than what you're doing right now, right? We're not using lithium, any of those things, right? You just can build here. It's like he was intrigued, like, here's what we're gonna do, right? I'll come in with a container, right? We sit on a bunch of containers close where the generation is. And during the day where we have excess power, we can take that power, right? I'll turn the machines on, the Bitcoin mining machines on, and we'll take all the excess power that it can give us, right? At night, when you need the power back, right, or whatever you're doing, we just turn it off, right? So we're capturing that excess that he has, right, in the periods of peak wind, and then just storing it in a monetary fuel cell.
Because Bitcoin enables that, would it be safe to say that energy now becomes a monetary asset?
It has always been, right? It's the mean. Money is a memory of work, right? What that means is that the representation of money is that work and energy was spent somewhere, by an individual, by a corporation, and this is the way that you stock that energy. This is how you move the energy across time. Money was born because of this, right? Think about it like in the early ages, in the, the stories that we hear about the yap cultures and their stones, right? It was born because of this, because people, they overproduce, like, okay, I have too much fish. What do I do? Oh, I'm going to give some of the fish away. And then in exchange, they're going to give me some stones that I later can store from something else, right?
Which is a representation of the energy that they spent getting the fish.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I think the Bitcoin mining industry is going to blur the lines finally and going to make this connection between energy and money in a way that we've never been able to. We didn't have technology for this until now. Now we have the technology to actually have a good representation of money, right? There's a lot of talk about gold right now. Gold failed, right? And it failed exactly because it could not, by necessity, you can't move a lot of gold around very easily, right? Yeah. I was telling you about the yap culture, right? And I don't know if this part of their story. So these guys, they had all these huge stones the stones didn't move, right? They just sat somewhere. And the ownership of the stones were like, annotated in these ledgers, right? We said, okay, that's Nico's stone, right? And then when you did a transaction, you just changed the ownership of the stone somewhere else. So one time they decided to move one of these big stones from one island to another island. They put it in a canoe, middle of the way. A storm comes in, sinks the canoe, sinks the stone, right? Everybody knew the stone was still there in the bottom of the ocean, right? So the abstraction of money was born from this. They realized, we think that this stone is there.
We could still mark it off.
But the ledger still goes there, right?
That's really funny.
And it is money is an abstraction.
Do you think that stone got a premium?
Maybe.
Reading the underwater stuff.
Or a discount. Maybe, divers went there and cut pieces of it. We don't know.
Like, I would want to own the underwater stone, man.
But my point is, for the first time, we have an asset that energy and money, they are walking hand to hand, right? Yeah. And they are the same thing.
Yo, I want to tell you about the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack, bitcoinwell.com. What makes Bitcoin Well different? What makes it unique? It's an automatic self-custody Bitcoin on-ramp. What does that mean? That means that when you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, as soon as the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address, which perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos, because after all, self-custody is the revolution. By the way, if you go to bitcoinwell.com/simply, as soon as you make your first purchase, you get 3 opportunities to win up to 1 million Satoshis just for signing up and buying a little bit of Bitcoin. Seems like a win-win. What are you waiting for? Go to bitcoinwell.com/simply today. It reminds me of this quote, that is from yours. And I've never heard this before. I was actually making a joke when I was preparing for this. I was like, I'm going to steal this and make this a tweet because I know it's going to blow up. But anyways, it goes something along the lines of, if money is a memory of work, which is what you're referring to, inflation is a form of amnesia. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, this goes back, I think, to my roots in Brazil, right? If money was a pure representation that you've done some work, and then somebody can just come in by printing more money or doing something, wipe that off. It is like amnesia, right? It's like the history of your work is forgotten, right?
Yeah.
All the work that you've done is just thrown out of the window, right? And the sad thing is not by your decision. It's by the decision of somebody else, by a push of a button that have no idea how they're impacting. And the saddest thing is that these things, we're exaggerating in terms of time. And when you compress time, it's easy to see. These things happen in small doses and in very long periods of time, right?
Yeah.
Go back to the US, right? The idea that having a 2% inflation is a good thing, it is a lie.
It's crazy. Like the idea that money somehow has to lose purchasing power in order to function is ridiculous.
It shouldn't be that way.
And the world got psyoped into it. And I think developing countries, right? You know, they deal with higher digit inflation, and the West, somehow we've been convinced that 2% inflation is okay.
Which is also a lie, because it's not even 2%.
No, now
right?
it's like
all
3.
The indices,
now
it's
they're like
3 on the
moving it to
indices.
3.
The indices are all manipulated, right? It's much more. They go, you know, because I'm not in the US now every so often.
Yeah.
When I go back to the US, every time I go to the grocery store is a shock. I'm like, you know, what is happening? Like it's you can feel it, that prices are going up like crazy.
It's much more. They change the metrics. It's much more than the 2 to 3% that they report.
It's a crime against humanity.
It really is.
It is.
It really is.
They're stealing your time away.
But it's theft, right? It's literally theft, and it's the most insidious theft, because it's not overt taxation. So if you get taxed on something, you know that a percentage of that money that's sitting in your bank account is taken, right? It's the name, the number in the bank account stays exactly the same, but the purchasing power goes down. People they treat it as if it's normal. And I honestly believe that is one of the primary causes for wealth inequality in the world. And one of the primary causes for a lot of the political division that we see in many countries, right? Because as wealth inequality rises, people they naturally seek a political solution. But it's ludicrous, because both parties do exactly the same thing. They just print money. It doesn't fix the root cause, which is broken money, right? And I truly believe the world would be a better place if we fix the money. This is why Bitcoiners say, fix the money, fix the world.
This is exactly why we're here.
But Rapha, I want to go back to this idea of Bitcoin miners literally optimizing the grid, right? One of the things that blew my mind the most was this idea that Bitcoin miners are energy buyers of last resort. Before, that wasn't possible. So if you had a, stranded energy source in the middle of nowhere, right?
Just plug a miner there. You got a container and you're done.
Before Bitcoin, that energy would go to waste.
Yep.
People don't know this, but you actually lose efficiency if you transport electricity over long distances. So you kind of have to use it right then and now. And then batteries lose efficiency too.
Over time,
right?
Exactly.
So it's like these Bitcoin miners, they can go anywhere. They're like nimble.
Yep.
And they just use up all of that electricity. But can you describe how that benefits the grid long term, and how that creates stability, and how that creates a win-win situation for not only the government, but also the people of the country?
Yep. I'll keep this very simple. Imagine you have a town, right? And Lugano is going to need, 300 megawatts of energy consumption, right? But that's in the peak. They think, well, in the summer when all these houses are air conditioning up, right? And consumption is very, very high, that's what we need. We need 300 megawatts at the peak. So if you are the mayor of Lugano, you need to make sure that you're going to have 300 megawatts of energy available at your disposal every single time, right? Today's a cold day. Nobody has the air conditioner on, right? So we're not consuming 300 megawatts. Probably you're consuming 150, 120, right? This whole energy is somehow waited to be used and can't be used, right? People have this conception that energy is a fixed supply, and somewhat it's like a zero-sum game, so that you're using energy you're taking from somewhere else for someone else that was consuming it. It's not true. There's a lot of stranded power, a lot of energy that is not being consumed, right? As you mentioned, Bitcoin mining, I think there are two beautiful things about what it can do to the grid. The first one is being the buyer of last resort, right? So we'll say, okay, we understand that, you build all this capacity. We'll come in, we'll take all the capacity, we'll use it. And we'll pay you for that because, of course, we're using that, we're mining, we're converting to Bitcoin. And then there are actually some governments and companies are starting to click to them. Like, oh, this is actually a way for me to monetize this energy that it's just going to waste, right? It's not being used. And you go there, you set a mining container or a set of containers, right, directly to the source, and you start mining Bitcoin. And then I tell them, I'm going to pay a percentage, I get a percentage, right? What that did to the grid now, and then we're also the sellers of first resort, because when the summer comes in and they're like, oh, now we really need the energy, Bitcoin mining is the only industry that we can turn off like literally in a click of a button, right? Like, okay, machines are off, we're not consuming it anymore. So it's extremely dynamic. We've never seen this in the industry before, right? You have a steel producer, right? For example, a steel producer, they can't turn off. Literally, if you turn off like the factory, it takes 2 months to be turned back on. We can turn on and turn off. There is a little bit of degradation of machines if you do too much, but it's minimal. It's nowhere close to what you're talking about here. So it really transforms the dynamic. The other thing is that we're the only industry probably don't have any clients, right? My client is the Bitcoin protocol at the end of the day. So I'm not worried about my clients getting pissed off, right? You know, is it bad for Bitcoin? No, I mean, it's marginal. I'm a tiny fraction. Even though we're a large miner, we're a tiny fraction.
What percentage of the hash rate?
We're probably the largest, we're already the largest private Bitcoin mining company in the world.
And no one knows who you guys are?
No, you'll get there.
It's completely stealth.
It's not completely stealth. People in the industry know mostly who we are. They understand. You know, we don't get here without talking to a lot of the manufacturers, right? As I said, our team is very engaged in doing a lot of things. So people know. We're just not vocal. There's no need. As I said, I don't have a client, right? My client is a Bitcoin protocol.
Of course.
So I don't, you know, there's no need to have like huge marketing budgets and any of that. We may in the future for other reasons, right? But right now there's no need to do that. And you asked me in the beginning, how did we get here, right? And I think it's important to cover. When you look at think about an ASIC. What an ASIC is a machine that transforms fiat. You inject energy on it, and then you get Bitcoin at the end of the day, right? To do this, you need two assets. You need fiat to buy the machines, right? You need energy to power the machines, right? So in this industry, first of all, you have, which is obvious, you need to have access to cheap power, right? If you have energy, think you have free energy, for example, you can still run old generation ASICs, and it's still going to be very profitable.
Of course, you're still going to make a ton of money.
Exactly, and these are cheap ASICs, right? And you're still going to. We actually did a study showing like a long time how the ASICs perform and when they start to lose profitability, right? And at 2 cents power or at 3 cents power, actually, even the first generations S9s are extremely profitable.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, you know, if you have extra power, you want to have more efficiency for other reasons, right? You want to mine more Bitcoin, but at the end of the day,
why wouldn't you plug in a machine that's going to make you money, right?
Exactly.
You know, I think it always comes down to, you know, what's your cost per kilowatt hour, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that...
But just to conclude, this part, everybody gets that it's cheap energy. The part that the industry misses is that you need cheap capital and you need a good capital structure.
Okay.
And this makes all the difference.
And you think that's the differentiator with how you guys are approaching it? Okay,
100%.
Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, so, you know, we have a good partnership with Tether. Tether has been with us and supporting us from the beginning. First of all, these guys are true Bitcoiners, right? I've met a lot of people in the industry. They're true Bitcoiners. They do this for Bitcoin.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Absolutely.
Right? And they see the need to have mining, right? We've been in meetings that they ask me, like, you know, should we buy Bitcoin or should we mine? And I always tell them, buy Bitcoin. That's probably better than you're not going to have machines burning, right? You're not going to have the headaches, and you're still going to have the best asset and collateral in the world, right? But that being said, mining has advantages as well. There's indirect advantages of helping secure the ledger, right? And it has, you know, if you're doing mining, you're going to help the protocol in other ways because we're always doing research, we're looking at other things, right? So there are, I think, tangential benefits to that. And it's also a very good and very profitable business if you do it right with the right capital, right?
Yeah.
Tether has the lowest cost of capital in the world. It doesn't get lower than zero, or maybe it does, but you know, their cost of capital is literally zero. So they deploy capital into mining. You know, we're here in Lugano. They're going to talk about mining in the next few days. It's important, it's critical. And, you know, that's what really allows this. We have the combination of cheap capital, and then we go out and we find cheap energy as well, right? Look back, it's easy to prove this. Look back at the last cycle of mining, when a lot of the mining companies blew up. Most of them that blew up, they didn't blow up because energy prices spiked or, hash price went down, right? All of this, of course, happened, but that's not what blew them up. What blew them up was they were over-leveraged, the wrong capital structures, right? So either they had to pay their debts that were extremely expensive, right? Or they couldn't get access to capital any longer, right? Or, even worse situation that happens time and time again, they would have to dilute their shareholders massively by issuing more equity, right? So if you don't have the right capital structure to begin with, nothing else matters.
And that's the differentiator between Elektron and how you guys do business, which is you guys have access to cheap capital, which allows
and we have a killer team as well, which, you look, we are... I love to do sports, right? I think one of the key things in sports is...
And by the way, if anyone doesn't know, Rapha has a resting heartbeat of 19.
No, I do not. I'm going to have to correct you again.
32. That isn't a correction. That's true. That's weird.
Maybe
man.
not now because I'm not, extremely trained, but yeah. But on sports,
Right now it's like 70.
With you, I'm probably, so, I don't know. But going back to what I was saying, I think, discipline and persistency are key in anything that you do. You are going to hit obstacles. You are going to hit, there's going to be difficulties all the time. And the team of Elektron, like these guys, most of them have been with me from the beginning. I've never seen a team that it's this resilient, right? You can throw anything at them. And it's almost like I was joking, like the other day we had a challenge, like this is anti-fragility at its best. Like we'll throw stuff at you guys and it just rise at the other side, stronger with a better company and, getting better in everything that we do. So I honestly, this is not me being humble, man. It's not me. Like this is all came together because we were at the right time, the right place, with the right people, with the right partners, right? And was just a perfect combination.
Well, I think it requires also, it's not only a great team, it also requires a great leader and also a good mindset on how to approach business and how to operate things in the correct way, in the Bitcoin way, and the way using the Bitcoin ethos. Because I don't think it's just a simple, there's a lot of components that, create a very efficient machine. And I think that's what you guys have done.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Do you need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted source for Bitcoin-backed lending, with transparency, security, and trust at their core. Backed by $9 billion of Bitcoin loans funded and over 1,000 5-star reviews. I absolutely love these guys because of their flexibility. You can pay back your loan whenever you want. And there are no monthly payments, so you pay at the end of the term. You get lightning fast access to capital. As soon as you send your Bitcoin as collateral, you get the cash into your account within 18 hours. Unlock the liquidity of your Bitcoin without having to sell your Bitcoin. Simply Bitcoin viewers get 0.25% off their first loan by using the link in the video/podcast description. What are you waiting for? Check out Ledn today. So Rapha, you've said in the past that Bitcoin is a monetary fuel cell. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think what we were talking about, storing, it's the best way to store energy and store work, right? Because we said work is energy, a long time. If I had today to make a choice, gun to my head, you have to store your wealth for 100 years in one asset that, it's going to sit there for 100 years. It can only be unlocked in 100 years. I can't think of any better assets in store than Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is going to outlast all of us, right? The network is extremely resilient, extremely distributed, right? I would never put my money in a bank that, very few banks are resilient for one. And even in a bank, the asset that it underlies the bank is broken, which we talked about, it's the fiat. It's going to be debased. So even if Bank of America doesn't go under, JP Morgan doesn't go under, it doesn't matter. Fiat is going to be debased a long time. So for the first time in humanity, we have an asset that actually can persist a long time. And people confuse a lot when they talk about, store of value and money, right? The proprietaries of a medium of exchange for the day-to-day, they don't realize that for the first time, the reason why the medium of exchange was, wrong and was broken was because you couldn't move the money at the same time. So for the first time also, you can actually have the two of them together, right? The Bitcoin ledger unless, of course, fees go through the roof and it's too expensive, it's going to take time, but then we're going to have second layers that are going to be built on top of that, right? But for the first time, you can actually bring these two together. And I think this conversation between, what comes first, what comes next, we shouldn't even be having this conversation because it won't matter in the future. When you really have a good second layer and you have Bitcoin as a store of value, it doesn't matter. We created these abstractions of, the medium of exchange being different than the store of value because you needed to create an abstraction. You needed to have the ledger referencing the stone that it's, in the bottom of the ocean, right? We don't need that anymore. And the ledger and the asset also, for the first time, are together, right?
Absolutely.
The ledger secured by miners, they're securing the transactions, making sure you don't have double spend. And, the store of value secured by SHA-256, by, elliptical curve cryptography and everything else that will protect your money against your signature against somebody else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you said, Rapha, and we were talking about in the beginning about the United States and how it's very unique. It's a land of opportunity. It embraces immigrants from all over the world that have the merits, to come to the country and, follow the American dream, which I say all the time, basically. The American dream, because a lot of people are saying the American dream is dead. I was like, American dream is thriving. You're just using the wrong unit of account. But, one of the things that I appreciate is the American entrepreneurial spirit, right? And I feel like Bitcoin mining is really at the technological frontier of, what is possible, what can you do? And I think only in the US are you able to reach the heights that you want to reach, either by tapping into the financial markets, which again, just lead the rest of the world by such a large margin, or just the brain capital, like the brain power that's in the United States. It's very, very unique. So could you talk a little bit about that? Like, why focus on the US? Like, why do you have this deep appreciation of the fact that they, welcomed you with open arms, Yale, Goldman Sachs? Like, what is that special relationship that you see?
In this case, it is a business decision at the end of the day. So let's go back to what I was saying, right? So you have an ASIC, you need to inject energy, and you need capital. As you said, the US is the best place in the world for capital, right? So, and when I mean capital, it's not only for us, it's for infrastructure, because we go to these places to deploy machines, we need to have some infrastructure around. You need to have roads, you need to have paths to get there, right? The US is very well positioned to that. Also, I've looked into mining into, dozens of different countries, right? And I always come back to the US because, first of all, there's abundant energy, even though people keep crying that there's not enough energy. Like on the day-to-day, at least for what we do, there's more than abundant energy. There's a lot of stranded energy that is not being used that we could use, right? It's still fairly cheap, relatively cheap. And the country has rule of law, right? I mean, it's changing a little bit, but it still has a very good rule of law, compared to, mining in Ethiopia and other places where you have cheap energy, you have all of these things. But quite honestly, I don't know if my ASICs are going to be there in 3 months, right? I mean, you are going to have to, and I'm using Ethiopia as an example. I could use Brazil, which I know very well. We're starting to look into a project in Brazil. We're going to do something there. The other asked me, is like, you're Brazilian, you should do something in Brazil. There's a lot of energy in Brazil. Why don't you do something in Brazil? And then I told him, like, listen, I'm from Brazil. I know Brazil too well to want to do something in Brazil. Sometimes ignorance is a bliss. So I know that I'm going to have to, jump through hoops to get things done. And it's not going to be easy. And law is going to change 100 times for the year, right? But we're finally getting some comfort to doing something there. But it's not easy. In the US, you already have standardized contracts, standardized, everything. Like PPAs are standardized. So it's much easier to do business in a place like that embraces entrepreneurial spirit, that, it's pro-business at the end of it.
Do you think it's important that the United States embraces Bitcoin mining?
I think it's not important. It's critical. If the countries that don't embrace this, they're gonna, fade compared to everybody else. I don't think they have an alternative at the end of the day. If I was in a position of that I could influence the US right now, I would tell them, like, the best thing you could do is embrace Bitcoin mining, partner with Bitcoin mining companies, right? And work if we have access to, like, we had this conversation, give me access to cheap energy and we'll pay you a percentage of what we produce, for example, right? And this is done at not only the government level, at the corporate level, right? These are things that I think governments should start thinking. Eventually, governments are going to start mining themselves. They still need operators, but they are going to start mining themselves, right? I think this is actually, we have, enough evidence that this is probably happening at scale in some countries, right?
I know Burma is like such a crazy case study. It's like 1/3 of their GDP is in Bitcoin. It's like some ridiculous. Wow, I got the country wrong. Look at me. That was dumb. The Kingdom of Bhutan. Yes, thank you, Hoff. I appreciate it. It's been a long day, but one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I was reading this on one of your reports. You talked about it in the phrase of strategic sovereignty. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, think about today, think about the countries and there's this rush to gold, right? Why do central banks want to hold gold, right? Because for them, funny enough, that's how they see store of value being, preserved a long time. You wonder why they don't have their own fiat at the central banks, right? They actually have gold and assets and other things. For all the reasons that we discussed, I think the countries that embrace this quicker, they're going to be able to build a strategic Bitcoin reserve first than anybody else, right? And it could be budget neutral, as Trump said. What you do is that you have a partnership with the Bitcoin mining industry, partnership. And of course, I'm talking my book here because I want to mine more in the U.S., but it's also like we have opportunities to be anywhere in the world. We are in the U.S., right? There are reasons for that. If the country embraces that, that's a very good way for them to actually build a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And fast forward to 100 years from now, they're not going to have the ability to print fiat to actually use Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to be the standard, right? So the countries are able to do that beforehand. I think they're going to have much more prosperity in the long term. All of that government talk being said, I want to say something that I think it's actually important and also gets missed on this. Thankfully, Bitcoin is an individual revolution. It started with the individuals and then it gradually goes up to, we had these conversations when institutions are coming. Yeah, institutions came, they're here, they're doing some stuff, not at the scale that everybody thinks, but they're here. Governments are coming, yeah, they're coming, right? But it all started with the individual. And I think it's one of the most fair ways of wealth distribution.
Yes.
None of them are going to be ideal, right?
Of course.
But this is super fair. Anybody with a laptop like 10, 11 years ago could mine Bitcoin, right? It could be a poor person, a rich person. It doesn't matter. And we would mine it at scale.
Even still, man, I know it's very tiny projects, but like the BitAxe, you hear like people winning solo blocks and stuff. But if you compare and contrast that with, the traditional financial system, only... how do I say this? That there's no other way to say it. Only the government is able to create more of it, right? Private citizens cannot create more of it. That's called counterfeiting, right? But anyone can create more Bitcoin, right? As long as you invest in the energy infrastructure, you can create more Bitcoin. That sounds like a much more level playing field. And then the beautiful part about it as well is that, if you have the capital, it doesn't matter whether you have a nation state behind you or you have a large corporation behind you, or let's say you have a very popular name, everyone has to pay the same electricity costs. It's a very, very fair system compared to the system we have now. And I think, like I was telling you earlier, I think that even though the system we have now was built with good intentions, I think it's led to catastrophic consequences, specifically for the lower and middle classes that don't have the means to save in assets.
Yeah, there are two big problems with this. One we talk a lot of, which is the Cantillon effect, right?
Yeah.
So those are closer to the money printer benefits, right? And you see this in the Senate, we see this in, different people that have good friends in the government, right? It's crazy, that shouldn't exist, it exists. But on the other extreme, are the damages of inflation, which are also driven by the same government, right? So they screw in their way in and then on their way out on a day-to-day with inflation as well. So no wonder it's hard for populations to keep up. No wonder people have to work more. No wonder that, a dad can spend, time with their kids and work, every day from morning to night, because their money is worth much less than it was worth before. And saving actually becomes a problem, right? They can't save. Even if they work a ton, where are they going to put the money, right?
Yeah.
This drives behavior like more gambling, right? Because people want
It's nihilism. It's nihilism.
It's nihilism, but I think it's even worse at that because people have this false sense of hope that Brazil now, these betting companies, online betting companies, that they bet in everything in sports are exploding, are massive, right? There's a reason for that, right? If you are somebody that I earn 1,000 reais, I know that I'm only going to have 10 reais at the end of the month. It's very easy for me to say, I'm just going to spend that away, bet it, and maybe I'll get another 1,000 reais if I'm very, very lucky. But if not, so be it. It's fine because money is worthless, right? So it creates this bad mentality. When people think they ask me a ton about like, oh, where do you think Bitcoin is going? You know, what's the market cap for Bitcoin? Bitcoin is going to demonetize gold, all these things, that the real estate, all these things. Like, I'm not worried. This is all going to happen. It's also going to create a new marketplace for savings that does not exist today. And
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like a new marketplace for savings? What does that mean?
Yeah. So people that right now are just gambling their money away, they're going to the casinos, they're just investing in shit coins, all of those things. There's a reason why they're doing that, right? When they know that they have, you see this with Bitcoiners all the time. Bitcoiners become, minimalist. It's like we sell our chairs, right? Because why is that? Because you have an asset finally that, create savings. You have the best savings technology ever invented, and you want to put more assets into that. It encourages you to work, encourages you to save, and these are all very good things, I think, for society. Instead, in one side we have an asset that it's promoting saving, it's promoting intergenerational wealth, it's promoting store value, it's promoting more time, it's not diluting your time, right? And on the other side, you have gambling and fiat and all of these things. For me, the choice is very, very simple. It's a moment. I wrote about this a while back. So I remember I was, I'm not going to get the date right, but when Uber came out, they're called something else, robotaxi. I forgot the name of it was called. They had a deck that was circulating at the time. I got access to this deck, and I remember looking at the deck and showing that what their total addressable market was, right? I say, our addressable market is a market for taxis, right? And that market was, I don't remember the numbers, so I'm going to make up the numbers. So if let's say the numbers were $4 billion, right? That was the total addressable market for taxis. Nobody could perceive that Uber would create, would change the mentality of people, would change the way that you use taxis, and they expanded the total addressable market.
There's a story of people buying the medallions.
Yeah,
the
New York City.
medallions, they had this crazy premium
price, $1 million
because everyone thought, this was a sure bet. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere came Uber.
Gone.
And it's like those medallions, they it's crazy.
Medallions were store of value in New York City, right? There you go.
I'm still thinking about the rock under the sea, the Nico token.
I want to give a shout out to our partner, sat123.com. Sovereignty isn't just about your money. It's about your communications too. When the grid goes down, most people go dark. Cell towers fail in hurricanes, cyber attacks, and blackouts. But satellite phones, they don't rely on local infrastructure. Iridium has 77 satellites in orbit, giving you a direct line anywhere in the US, even offshore. If you hold your own Bitcoin keys, you should hold your own comms too. Sat123.com also has everything you need to start building your Bitcoin citadel. Starlink, battery backups, Faraday bags to protect your hardware wallets, and much, much more. It's a one-stop shop for anyone serious about resilience and off-grid independence. Stay connected, stay independent, stay sovereign. Go to sat123.com/simply today and use promo code SIMPLY to get 15% off anything on the store.
So, Rapha, I think one of the things that perhaps could be a misconception towards how it's very popular amongst global elites these days, that this idea that the use of energy itself is bad. But the use of energy in Bitcoin is a feature and not a bug. Could you talk a little bit about that and why it's a positive?
Yeah. I think, first of all, politicians created this whole rhetoric around, global warming. And of course, there is some warming, but it doesn't matter. It's not, if they change the energy consumption drastically, we talked about this in the beginning, it's going to lead to less progress, not more progress. What you need to think about is how to use energy, not less, but more efficiently. How do you optimize grids, as we discussed? How do you get closer to stranded energy, as we discussed, right? And then with all of this, strengthen the grids, get everything. It's going to take time, Nico. I think, for politicians to really understand this, it's going to take time. Their incentives are not aligned right now in order to understand any of this. Their education level to understand any of this, it's, I don't know, it's 3 miles away.
Do you think that the U.S. is at least leading on this front, specifically with the change with the new administration? That's been extremely...
I don't know, man, because
really,
while you see some, there's definitely more talk about Bitcoin, but there's also more talk about crypto. There's more talk about, shit coins. There are some things happening that I don't like seeing happening, right? Is it a net positive or negative? I think it's a net positive, but it's not, like a slam dunk as most people think it is. Give you one example also story that we face, and this is actually one of the reasons why we're exploring going to Brazil. We acquired a ton of machines of ASICs to come to the US, right? And these machines come from different places in the world. We usually schedule this with time, there's a schedule. Well, we were scheduled to bring some machines in, tariffs hit. And so literally overnight, and the way this happened was overnight, through tweets happening from Trump, right? Literally overnight, we had to make a decision. Are we going to cancel the orders? Are we going to grow less? How are we going to do it? Whatever we could put in planes, we put in planes. Like, the team was scrambling like through a week, and it was crazy. Trying to find like empty Boeings to put ASICs in and bring to the US, right? I ended up, a lot of things happened, but the tariffs are high now, right? Even for Bitcoin miners, not only the tariffs, we had ASICs stuck in customs in the US since April.
Wow.
There's some of our ASICs are stuck in customs.
And that's just depreciating, man.
And not only depreciating, they'll charge you for storage as well.
Oh, wow. So it's like a 1-2 punch.
So although there are many things that we see are very friendly, there are also things that we see are like, well, maybe we need to diversify to other places, right? It's great. I tell this all the time, like, it's crazy for me to think that, I'm starting to mine in Brazil because I'm having some of these issues in the US, right? So I think there's a lot, to answer your question, there's a lot of talk about being friendly and, getting these things done. Some of it is true. There's, don't get me wrong, the fact that Trump is in office is much better than he wasn't. If he wasn't, maybe we didn't have an industry at all. But there's still a lot of things that need to be fixed in order for the US to really be, I think, the Bitcoin mining country of the world, which it can be. And
Orange Man needs to get rid of the tariffs. I thought he said have fun with the Bitcoins at the Bitcoin conference. I'm pretty upset. When Trump took office, the Bitcoin price was like 109K. And today the Bitcoin price is 109K. So, I mean, he's kept most of his promises, but I agree. I mean, I definitely think that there definitely could be some improvements, and I agree with you. I think it's a matter of education. Like, there are some senators that are just, they know exactly what's going on, and there are some senators that still think Bitcoin miners are boiling the oceans.
But it's not because they are stupid or they are badly incentivized or have bad, like, a lot of them just don't know. Like, I've been in conversations like this that you can see, like, if government official, last week I was with a very high government official, and I had this conversation around, Bitcoin being the buyer of last resort, the seller of first resort, right? And you can see that something click. It's like, I never thought about it this way.
Yeah.
They also confuse a lot of Bitcoin mining with AI, HPC, completely different industries.
Of course.
He's like, well, but you need, you need all these sophisticated data centers, and you need to be in a place that you have all this connectivity and, redundant power. Like, you are confusing us completely with another industry. Our industry is the most adaptive, the most resilient. We literally have containers in the middle of Texas in the desert that are hashing. And I would rather they be in Norway, with much cooler weather, but they hash there as well, right? At the end of the day.
Absolutely. So one of the things you buried the lead like towards the beginning, middle of the conversation, where you're basically saying, if Tether were to ask you, say, hey, Rapha, should we buy Bitcoin or should we mine Bitcoin? You'd say, oh, we definitely want to buy Bitcoin. You guys definitely want to buy Bitcoin instead of mining it. My question to you is, why are you mining if you shouldn't just be buying?
There are benefits to mining.
Okay.
And
I know you mentioned a few, but
yeah. So that's not, of course, a decision that goes in isolation. And when you think about how you're going to have a Bitcoin mining stack, you're going to have a mining stack. It's better for you to have a combination of two than just having one. It actually smooths out your easy way to think about this. Think about portfolio construction, right? When you look at correlation between two assets, when one asset is going up, the other is going down, right? You want to find assets to put in your portfolio. They're less correlated so that at the end of the day, you end up with better risk-adjusted returns. You may end up with pretty much the same return that you would have, or actually even a little bit lower returns than what you had in the beginning, right? Let's say you have an asset that you know is going to explode up in value, but it's extremely volatile. But you have another asset that, you know, it's going to kind of hold its value a long time and it's going to be very low volatile. When you put the two together, you're going to have less returns, but you're going to have significantly less volatility, which means you have a much better risk-adjusted return. So for every unit of return that you're getting, you're taking much less risk, right? Which means that your portfolio is much more resilient, that it can last much longer, that you're less subject to drawdowns. Here, it's kind of like the same concept when I think about it, that, you know, we shouldn't be looking at two of them in isolation. You should think about them, one kind of like working together with the other. Even if you put aside all the extra components that I mentioned about helping the protocol, all of these other things, right? Just on a return perspective, them together actually end up with better risk-adjusted return. There's another reason for this, which is, you know, I'm talking about, you know, in the base case scenario, which is, I don't know, hash rate continues to go up significantly, Bitcoin price continues to go up significantly, right? And you're probably better off buying Bitcoin. But you could have scenarios where the Bitcoin price goes up exponentially and hash rate does not follow for several reasons, right? We actually did a lot of studies around, because there's this talk about, you know, the correlation between hash rate and Bitcoin price. There's no correlation. There's no lagging correlations. I think we ran all the numbers. There's no correlation at the end of the day, right? Which is a good thing that there is no correlation, because you could have a scenario where Bitcoin price explodes up and hash price doesn't go up. And actually, if I put my hat of Bitcoiner, you know, why I went into Bitcoin and everything else, people talk about all the price models, you know, there's only one model that I believe in, which is the stock to FOMO model, which it's a curve that is like this. You have, you know, a nice curve, and then all of a sudden it explodes exponentially up, right? The reason why I think we're going to see this is hyperbitcoinization. This is when everybody comes to the conclusion that this is the best asset that we have. It becomes a store of value, and it doesn't explode up because the value is exploding up. It's because fiat is collapsing, right? And in that scenario, Bitcoin mining is going to beat Bitcoin if that happens, right? A long time. So when you think about it, because hash rate is not, price is going to accelerate much quicker than hash rate.
I have a really good friend of mine, the way he described it, and he's also CEO of a publicly traded Bitcoin mining company. And the way that he described it to me, I never forgot it. He's like, Nico, you have to understand, Bitcoin mining is like a leverage long. And that always stuck with me, you know? So if it's
a better lever long than a Bitcoin treasury.
Oh, if you want, we can get into that. So yeah, like if it goes sideways, you know, it's like a slow bleed. If it goes down, it's like, you know, put a tourniquet on it. But if it goes up, your cost to mine a Bitcoin stays relatively the same, but the price is exponentially higher. So it becomes that much more profitable, right? But you want to be there to catch the wave, right? And you could be waiting for a long time. I know you surf, so it's a great analogy.
It is.
Where do you see Bitcoin 5 years from now?
In terms of price?
In terms of however you want to, however you want to interpret that question, it's totally up to you.
Yeah, I'll start with price, because price. Then
it's an easy go. Yes,
it's an easy one. It's not the answer you want.
I love. Oh, that makes me sad.
It's unpredictable. No one knows. Like you know, same
Are
thing.
the 4-year cycles over?
I don't know if there are cycles or not. I don't think there are cycles. And if, you know, we don't have enough data to prove that there are cycles. We only have a few with like relevant volume and data, right? So we don't know if there are cycles. We don't know if the cycles are going to be the same. And I can guarantee if everybody's talking about the cycles are not going to happen. Bitcoin, it's this asset that, you know, always takes the path of more resistance. And this is why it becomes, you know, anti-fragile. It's usually, it's the opposite of a traditional financial asset, that it's gradually goes up. We say in financial assets go up, you know, through the escalator and then down the elevator shaft. Bitcoin is the opposite. It goes up, it's a rocket that then it gradually goes down, you know, and then you think, oh, it's going to come back in the atmosphere, and the rocket just explodes up again. So it's impossible to predict asset in terms of behavior. Anybody that tells you with any conviction that they think price is going to go one way or the other, they're lying. They don't know, right?
Elektron or Bitcoin treasury companies?
Elektron, I didn't know, no question. Even though I have to disclose that I sit at the board of a Bitcoin treasury company, and
I'm asking you back questions today.
No, and I told those guys
Burma, Bhutan.
the reason why I sat on that board was from the beginning. I told them, everybody that interviewed me, I said, I'm not a huge believer in this business, and they came to me and they're like, well, we actually have a business behind it that we're going to be showing.
Could you elaborate? Because you broke it down to me one day, and I found it fascinating. Like, why do you think that is? Why are you more bullish on Elektron? Obviously, you're the CEO, but why are you more bullish on Elektron versus a Bitcoin treasury company?
Yeah, I don't think Bitcoin treasury companies are bad, just to be clear. I think they're a trade.
Yeah.
They have beginning, middle, and end, right? And it's a trade that is going to be traded away, it's going to be arbitraged away. And I think we're starting to see that, right? We started with, MicroStrategy, which I think they're still going to be around, very good company. They have a very strong balance sheet, no question about that. But they were the early ones. They were the first ones to identify the trades and to get cheap capital to deploy into Bitcoin when capital was still cheap, abundant, and Bitcoin price was much lower, right? But as in any trade, more and more players come in, and at some point, it's arbitraged away, and at some point, it actually becomes unprofitable to do that trade. I would venture to say we're already heading to there. You just look at the newest Bitcoin treasury companies that came up recently, right? They're struggling, they're suffering, right? Yeah. So I think that trade is going to have beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't mean that it doesn't continue and doesn't have another cycle, but it's going to be another trade that you're going, because what you're doing is just deploying more capital into an asset, right? Yeah. What's going to differentiate these companies in the future, I think, are the ones that start thinking about this as being a transformation into thinking about being the financial services companies in the future with other, services, other things they're going to provide. We all think that, the banks are the ones that are going to transform and actually get into Bitcoin. I think people are completely missing it. There's something else that is going to be born based on maybe Tether for the day-to-day rails, right? And then Bitcoin as a savings technology. I don't know. There's something that is going to emerge there. And I think the Bitcoin treasury companies start to identify that and start to migrate to that, or ones that may win in the future. Unfortunately, I think there's a little bit of negative selection here, because the Bitcoin treasury companies, to get where they are, they already need to have a little bit of fiat mentality, because they're going through the public markets, they're doing all of that. There's one thing I really don't like about this tendency of Bitcoin treasury companies. It has nothing to do with one company or the other. It's just, the ecosystem. Is that, and maybe you've seen this as well. I've seen dozens of very good Bitcoiners that I know that were working like in protocol level projects, that were working like in Bitcoin, second layer projects that have migrated, and all they're doing now at Bitcoin treasury, working with Bitcoin treasury companies. Hey, people should do what they think is the right thing to do. But what I don't like to see is seeing that talent being emptied from the protocol level. We see that at the mempool level also. Mempool, is empty all the time.
Yeah, the retail's non-existent. It's like, the thing to talk about is the ETFs these days, and people forget, like, the real revolution is Bitcoin and self-custody. That's really what's going to fundamentally change the world.
100%.
So, dude, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Rapha. Guys, you guys are going to hear more about Rapha. He's the CEO of the largest, I got it right this time, the largest private Bitcoin mining company on planet Earth. This guy's the man. He knows what he's doing. And Rapha, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate it.